And it was inspired by the experience and the power of what media can do to drive and accelerate a conflict or to play a role in reconciliation. And at that time, we're sort of essentially 30 or 40 years into the discussion around what peace journalism is. This idea, this world, this discipline that rose up in the mid to late 1970s, anchored in conflict analysis and peace studies. And at the time that I was in the Balkans, we decided to try an experiment using low data technology to connect people separated by war by video. Today we'd call it Skype, but back then it was tremendously innovative. And we went to Serbia, Croatia, and Bosnia, and we brought together literally Romeo and Juliet who had separated at a train station. We brought together a rock band who hadn't seen each other in 4 years. We brought together some doctors and nurses who worked in one of the largest hospitals in Sarajevo who hadn't seen each other for the entire war. Those films won many awards. They were broadcast in all of those countries. People were shocked at the ratings. After so much war and news coverage, it was a big surprise to everyone that the appetite for something else was far greater than anything expected. And for me personally, it was an indicator that despite the power of reporting violence, and despite the spread of it, there are alternative narratives to be found. More recently, with growing digital awareness and growing digital use in the media world, we've got some astonishing examples and new developments that we're just starting to try and understand. And Roland will be talking a little bit more about understanding those and capturing that data. But a really interesting and very happy example for me comes from Indonesia, from the eastern region of the Malukus. Perhaps not often visited by anyone in this room, but a critically important and beautiful part of the world, and a place where I spent a lot of time working. I lived in Indonesia for about 5 years. Earlier this year, through media, through people on the street, through a variety of different leaders, a rumor rapidly spread that a young Muslim girl, about 11 years old, had had her arms hacked off by someone from another religion across this divided city of Ambon in the Malukus. And within 2 hours, as the rumor spread, a counter-narrative began. And the counter-narrative said, she's fine, here's her picture, here's a video of her. And together, citizens, religious leaders, leaders in the media worked together to create an altogether different information ecology that day. And this continues to trend, to move, and be a part of the larger ecosystem of information that we understand to be in the field of media reconciliation. This, I understand and we know well, is in stark contrast to the discussions around polarization, to the echo chambers of information and media, to the questions of whether Professor Kastan Sunstein, very important thinker and leader on these issues here at Harvard University, is in fact right. Is he right when he suggests that all of us will continue to spiral deeply and more deeply and more deeply into the media of our own self-reflection and the media of our own self-interest? This is an ongoing debate. And as digital connection increases and the possibility for larger participation widens, and the facts of journalism continue to change, not the enterprise of it, not the skills it requires, not its importance as the fourth estate, but rather the people who own it, expropriate it, use it, call themselves one, and the fact that the power and the choice to tell stories and to spread stories has become something that's owned now by every single one of us. Thank you.
I would like to share with you why it is so important to pick up what Catherine just said. Because that's what we digest in the media, no matter whether we do this in America, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, it does have an impact on our lives, whether we want it or not. And as today's conference is focusing on reconciliation, I would like to start with the difficult part of getting this done via the traditional media. Governor Dukakis shared with us his experience that media are with presidents not only during the last election campaign over the last 5 years, but over the last 200 years, and making their lives not that easy. As you can see, media and war seem to be twins. They seem to be connected to each other in a way which we as journalists might not always like. I'm a fifth-generation journalist. My grandfather was among the first who were no longer allowed to write one sentence after 1933. War, dictatorships, the way how we live together has an impact on what we do. At the first glance, one has the impression it only has this negative part to us. And I will share with you the first results of our work. Just to give you a quick background, we analyze since 20 years, evening by evening, the TV network news, whether they are in America, ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, in Britain, BBC, ITV, in Africa, SABC, in China, CCTV. And we analyze story by story by story, what is the topic, who gets quoted, etc. We do this in order to defend our profession against influence from outside, but at the same time we have to see that not everything what we do as journalists is something to be proud of. As I'm from Germany, you might understand the first example I'm going to share with you. This is how American networks were covering leaders, political leaders, throughout the whole year in 2002. Germany had a president, we call him Chancellor, but he's hardly visible in the evening news in America. This had nothing to do with Gerhard Schröder. The results were the same in 2003 or 2001 or 2012. German chancellors obviously play no big role in the media. But what does that to the people? When you ask American elites who are the most known political leaders from Germany, the number one guy still is Adolf Hitler. Among the elites, among professors, among politicians, among business leaders who actually tried to sign a contract with the German chancellor, but still Adolf Hitler is the guy. Not to talk about then the rest of it. So when I come into a room in America and I say I'm coming from Germany, I have an idea what is in the heads of the people. If you take it to the next level and you try to understand what do we know from outside of the world, do the media, no matter whether they are American media or European media, do they help us to understand what is outside of our country? It's actually two regions who get coverage more than 5%. That's America and Palestine, or the Middle East. The rest of the world is getting 1% or not even 1%. Which could be okay if this 1% or nothing is covered in a reasonable way. But if you look at this picture, you can understand why we can't be satisfied with what is on the air. What is on the air in German evening news is not different to what is on the air in American evening news or in African news. Conflict dominates, problems dominate. It might be one of the reasons why Americans don't need a passport. Because if what you see outside is only red, why bother traveling? This is not a pure American result. But if I zoom closer into the different networks, we can see that within the evening news, the American networks are the ones who seem to be obsessed with the war. And as a journalist, when I see these results, the answer can't be because that's the only way how to do journalism. Because I do give credit to my colleagues in France. who run TF1 or who are journalists. And their news selection is a little bit different. It's around 5% of their evening news where they focus on war. If you want to see what was on screen until yesterday evening on CNN, just to give you a better idea, number 1, warfare. Number 2, non-political motivated crime. On the 5th position, accidents, catastrophes. This is your menu, evening by evening. With this menu, with this frame, it's difficult to talk about peace. And it's even more difficult to talk about reconciliation. We are all into these headlines of last week, what happened in the Middle East. And we think we don't understand why the people in Egypt, in Tunis, in this region are so aggressive, why they respond to a certain video in the way they respond. If you look at this result, you might understand a little bit better. If the Muslims are portrayed in American evening news in 2011 by -80%, you all of a sudden understand that maybe 1 or 2 Muslims no longer feel that comfortable. Because it always resonates of what one is doing. If a Muslim calls back his friends and his family in Egypt, and he says, the only way we make it into the evening news and ABC, CBS, and NBC is with a terror attack. Whether it is true or not, it doesn't matter. That is not helping us building bridges. The Swiss are no better. You might remember the Minaret initiative. They wanted to no longer build any minarets in Switzerland. We all know the fundamental first rule in our business is audiatur et altera pars. Give those who you are writing about, give them a voice. The Muslims in this whole debate did not even get 1% share of airtime. How can the Swiss understand what the Muslims are about if we are not giving them a mic and letting them understand what is going on? You remember 9/11? We don't have to talk about it, we directly see these pictures. What we don't see is that the Grand Mufti of Egypt was offering interviews to CNN, to BBC, to German networks. They says, I will go out, I go on air, and I'm telling you, whoever kills an innocent person has nothing to do with the Quran. He should be sentenced, he should be going to jail. This has nothing to do with the Quran. Did we see him on air? No. Did he want to go on air? Yes. He was on air in Arab media, but we didn't see him in this part of the world. It took almost 12 years to get him on CNN this weekend. Now finally he is on air. Although it took 5 days to convince the friends from CNN, if you want to have the equivalent of the Pope on air, do you want to do an interview with him? It took them 5 days to realize, oh, maybe we want that. Let's move closer to reconciliation. These are the results of the war in Gaza. If we only show one part of the victims, the other side, no matter which, don't ignore this result. It could be vice versa. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying is there are, on both sides are victims. If we only see one side of the victims, the other side logically feels not understood. The other side feels being treated as of less relevant. And as long as you are treated like that, I'm not surprised that people get not only angry, but dialogue gets more and more complicated. Another principle of our work is we will never ever put anything on air where we don't know what the source is. During the Iraq War, 30% of what private evening news in Germany were putting on air was not showing the source. In every other area, the leading editor would have said, this is not going to be on air. When it comes to war, no problem. Some of our colleagues start to reflect this, unfortunately only in Sunday papers. Whereas when he is on air in Swiss TV, he still continues doing what he is doing. This is the Gaza war. As an audience, you were understanding that the colleague is reporting from in the midst of the battlefield. He's reporting from safe Israel. The battlefield is kilometers further away. His Italian colleague even had no problems to put on his jacket. I don't know, when you don't want to be shot, you wear these jackets. He was wearing this jacket on this safe spot in Israel, just to pretend how difficult it is doing war coverage. But there are differences. That's not only one way how to cover conflict. You can see with these results that the American way is not the only way how to do news selection. You can see that, unfortunately, among the top, the Americans seem to be obsessed with violence. And you can see on the bottom that there are TV networks who are successfully working and who have less share of violence. To make this point totally clear, this is an example. It has nothing to do with war. This is pure business. It is few weeks old. And you can see how our colleagues have difficulties even getting simple facts right, or at least presenting them in the way that an audience has a chance to understand it. This is Wall Street Journal comparing with FT, with Leseko, and with the African Wall Street Journal. Look how they present Africa. One newspaper is telling you lose all your money in Africa, the other one is saying you make big money in Africa, and the other say, I don't know. The truth is you make money in Africa. And that has nothing to do with war. But it shows that obviously it's not the simplistic way, there's only one way how to do journalism, and if we don't have enough blood, then the audience will run away. Never buy this story. To honor Tran, for several reasons one should honor Tran. One reason is, before I haven't met him, I had the impression they are still in war in Vietnam. And with me are all my fellow friends in America. Because those who don't see the Vietnamese flag on this American flag, you don't have a problem with your glasses, you have a problem with your news provider. ABC, CBS, and NBC is giving Vietnam airtime of 0.03% in the evening news. And guess what? Vietnam is one of the next 11. So one of these countries after Brazil, Russia, India, and China, who are helping us to not become unemployed, who are helping us getting a perspective. But for an American news anchor, this seems to be of no interest. Why? Because foreign news anyhow only get 20% in American. And out of these 20%, 80% is reserved for Iraq, for our daily bomb out of Iraq. And the overall frame is done in a way, no matter which country they are presenting, that most of these countries are presented in a way that you don't want to deal with them, because they represent a region of high risk. To conclude, we all know this place. We all know this tower from school at least. I went there because I thought I need to see this tower at least once in my life. I went there and guess what I saw? I saw this. And immediately understood this is the problem of my profession. We focus on this because we think that's the relevant thing. But there's more. When we talk about conflicts, there's always the second story to the conflict, and that's the peace process. Media are able to cover that. And as you can see, these networks are really good in doing that. They are following up. After the conflict, they were interested in the peace process. They come back after 3 months, after 6 months, after 1 year, and they said, Kofi Annan managed a deal in Kenya. Where do they stand after 1 year? We need to know as an audience. If we don't know, we are lacking perspective. If you look at these results, how different evening networks are able to cover a conflict and a peace process from different perspectives. Again, you see your colleagues here in America are not among those who are doing good. But the examples existing out there are the ones who give me energy to continue with this work. We give once a year a peace award to those networks who actually show the diverse picture of what is going on, to show Pisa as it is, and who are not reducing countries or regions just to a tower. And I think that is what we are able to do, and that's what your example shows us, that there's hunger in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the great presentations. I was wondering if you can speak a little bit about the role that media played in the recent conflict that we've seen in the Middle East, and perhaps igniting the conflict, but also in calming the conflict down. Thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry, just to clarify, do you mean the recent release of the video?
Yes.
Last week? It's interesting. It's a really interesting contrast, actually, between to see what happens in the last couple of weeks with a film like this and what the recent research and studies actually show. The US Institute of Peace has just released a report sort of looking at the 2011 Arab Spring across about 3 or 4 countries through a program called Blogs and Bullets out of their innovation center. And one of the things that they were able to determine was that social media, the question of bit.ly, when we use Twitter, when we use Facebook, when we send texts with photographs or video attached, didn't play an overwhelming role in what happened on the ground. In a place like Egypt, only about 17% of the population is actually regularly connected to the internet anyway, and a significant number of the population don't even have mobile phones. And the role of traditional media across the region and the role of satellite television, especially Al Jazeera, reflecting back into the region was critically important to an understanding about what was going on there. It wasn't that it wasn't important, it was that it was surprisingly less important than people thought. And then we have what's happened in the last week and a half. I represent my organisation's participation on the board of the GNI, the Global Network Initiative, which is a multi-stakeholder organisation that seeks to bring together internet companies, human rights organisations, academia and non-profits to essentially thrash through the very modern questions about what to do when the international conventions and the moving transnationally of data and information presents these kinds of problems, or is in fact in contravention of national law. And what we saw was that countries, particularly in the Middle East, were citing national law, traditional law, Sharia law, hudud law, saying in our country it's illegal to incite violence in this way, to speak of religion at all in this way, or to dishonour it or insult our faith in this way. And it's presented an enormous quandary, I think also for international human rights groups and even some of the media here about what to do. One of the things I think for a lot of journalists trying to cover the issue is that it's extraordinarily disappointing to see how some of the coverage is actually focused on some of the worst outcomes. I don't know if anyone's been following on Facebook and Twitter the parodying of some of the mainstream media here in the US. Newsweek in particular this week came out with a very big photograph with Islam's Rage, angry photographs on the front, and the lesser known, slightly less journalistic site called Gorka and the Atlantic Wire printed about 13 pictures to counteract the pictures that were in the magazine and of Islamic Rage, and they were just spectacular. They were, you know, couples walking hand in hand, people busy at work, people dancing, people in the park, all taken recently from the same week in the same countries. And the humour has done something to diffuse it, but the television media particularly, and the polarisation in extreme circles, this echo chamber question rises once again around this issue. It's very unfortunate.
I would be interested in knowing more what is behind this video. I wouldn't be surprised if we find out that it's a similar story like with the Danish cartoon. The Danish cartoon got printed in Denmark in September. We all know that there are not that many copies sold in Egypt because they still have some problems reading Danish. We all know from our own experience that we don't keep these papers, especially those we don't understand, for more than 4 months. The Danish cartoon problem broke mid-January, and it broke after there was a ferry accident in Egypt where 1,000 Egyptians died, and the Egyptian government didn't help the families to first of all know what's going on and then help them how to deal with this. And this problem was increasing. And the Egyptian government needed something, what we call, to cut the agenda, get rid of this topic in the media by putting something else. So all of a sudden, a cartoon printed in Denmark made it into the media in Egypt. And people died because of that. In Gaza, they burned Swiss flags because they don't know the difference between a Danish flag and a Swiss flag. I'm surprised that you can even buy a Danish or a Swiss flag in the Gaza Strip. Nestle had to run big advertising telling the people in the region, you can continue eating our chocolate because we are Swiss, we are not Danish. This all sounds funny. But I ask myself, what is the job of our colleagues on the ground in the media? What are they doing? That they are not asking these questions, that they are not realizing, again, there are people abused to do something which they pay the highest price. And I'm actually sad for my colleagues that although we have all these examples, that we fall into the same trap over and over and over again. And it doesn't make us smart, it doesn't help us to sell more copies of our papers, it's just saddening.
It was interesting to note that in reference to the Danish cartoons, they had actually been out in distribution for over a year before they were actually translated, and there was such a really strong response to them. And the same goes with the film. It wasn't in fact until it was subtitled or voiced over that it went into wider distribution, and now some of the real snapshot surveys, there's no good data on this yet, but certainly colleagues in Pakistan are reporting that an extraordinary number of people on the streets have never seen the film and don't know anything about it and don't know what's on it. There were some interviews done just after the US Embassy wall was breached in Cairo, and they discovered that a significant number of the young men who had actually breached the wall had come from a football game not very far away. The Christian Science Monitor has tried to gather some information this last week and has done a rough calculation that all around the world, less than 100,000 people have taken to the streets. There are arguably more people protesting about other things around the world right now at that number. It's absolutely true that the phenomena is extraordinary, and that the loss of life in Libya and the things that happened there are truly tragic, but it's very, very difficult to get a handle on the facts right now.
But one other point is interesting. We had the Schonstein birthday last year, and we were able to listen to the lady who was in charge of the training ambassadors around the world from the State Department, out of the team from Hillary Clinton. And I was actually shocked listening to her and hearing how proud she is that now these ambassadors are able to tweet or what they are doing with all these wonderful social media. And I was wondering whether or not it would make much more sense if these ambassadors at least once per week go out and talk to Arab journalists, making sure that an interview or a story on America or whatsoever is actually in the media in Egypt, in Tunis, in Lebanon. They don't do this type of work. They are not on air in Egyptian TV, in Lebanese TV, and because of that, it is easy for extremists to say and point with the fingers of these Americans, say, okay, let's burn that house, or let's do this and let's do that. And we have to ask ourselves, what have we done throughout the last 18 months? Because from Tahrir Square 18 months ago, we all know there were 1 million people evening after evening after evening, and guess what, where they passed, which building they passed. Every evening they passed the Embassy of America, and they didn't burn it. So what has happened that now they do these things? What have we done in communication, in letting people know what's going on throughout these last 18 months that they now do this?
Next question. Please.
I thought your research that gave us insights into the agenda-setting function of the media around the world related to conflict was really fascinating, and I appreciate your sharing it here with this audience. I had a couple of questions. One question is, do you have a way of sharing that with an audience beyond those of us here? For example, people who own media outlets, you know, journalists who are responsible for covering this, editors. I just wondered if that might provide them with an opportunity for self-reflection. And the second question I had is a question that you talked to a little bit when you talked about the Egyptian government, which is the question of why. What is the attraction beyond the drama, the human drama of this kind of, you know, inflammatory problem? That why does it happen? Have you looked at perhaps doing some qualitative research and interviewing journalists or editors or people who are responsible for setting the agenda in these countries? I really compliment your work. It's very impressive, and I just wondered if that is perhaps something that you might be able to do to further help understand, you know, what this kind of coverage, what kind of effect it has on our democracies, on our societies, on even, in fact, people's lives. That people are killed as a result of, you know, this kind of inflammatory discourse in the media. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on so long.
Thank you. Right now in German and in English language, and we are changing that so it's in Arabic and in Vietnamese and in Chinese. All data are freely available, and you can download that. And you can have these books which I distributed. And to make the work better, you have this poll. If you fill that out, the poll is officially done for the Atlantic Council and the National Intelligence Council, and the results are going to be presented to the guys. No matter how the election will turn out in November, there will be a conference December 10, 11 in Washington, and these results will be presented to those who have to think about what should we do in 20 years or in 30 years. The reason why I'm interested in this Global Agenda Index is because we are able to confront our media data with your answers. This poll will not only be done, or is not only done in America. For the first time it's done in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, so one gets the whole range of answers. The key question is, what do you think is most important in next year, in 5 years, and in 2030? That's a typical question. The question I love is question number 3. What was the topic you were bothered with the most during the last 12 months, and now you realize it was not that relevant? And we will confront both answers, the answer of question 1 with, as well as the answer of question 3 with our media results. And without knowing the results, I'm pretty sure that what is in the evening news in TV, number 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 topic, will be the answer of question 3. And we will have difficulties finding the answer for question 1 in our data. And I hope that in 3 years, in 5 years, as we are going to continue this year by year, that journalists start to call us and say, actually, what are these leaders interested in? What do they think is a relevant topic? So we, as journalists, now start to do our research on that. But that's just a dream.
Okay, so thank you. My question concerns, I guess, the portrayal of violence. I come from Mexico, so there's sort of a war going on there, in case you don't know. And so I would like to ask you if you would recommend regulation on the media in their portrayal of violence, because you know, this is a very important issue in a way, but nobody's talking about it. So,
as a former journalist and a passionate freedom of expression advocate, I couldn't say that I would encourage more regulation of content. But I think that Mexico deserves special examination. You have an enormous, vibrant media there, but you also have a very politicized and somewhat captured media as well in certain circles. And I think one of the really big questions going forward is there a way for the really significant journalistic, editorial, influential, storytelling voices in Mexico to prevail safely and tell their stories more safely and get them out into the mainstream? And it's an unsolved question.
Well, I'm sorry. We promised the club that we would wrap up 7 minutes ago. I'm delighted we were able to squeeze out an extra bit of club time. So, but this has been a fabulous panel, a fabulous afternoon. I want to thank Kathleen Rowland for an extraordinary presentation. And I also want to thank you for coming. This has been one of the best audiences I've sat through at Harvard. So, and if you're in the Fulbright group, enjoy your time at Northeastern. But thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Congratulations, this was great. Things are good? How's your family?
Very good. I did like October maybe.
I would love to get together.
That's great.
Thanks. This was